Alrighty. Hello, everyone. This is Chapter 15, Weight and Appearance. My name is Brian Marenco. I will be presenting along with Samantha Palacios, Ocean Rhodes, and Frank Dixon. We're going to be discussing obesity, weight, and how it affects the employer, the legislation, and everything. Okay, what we're presenting over is going to be the description of weight and appearance, more likely the definition and everything, how excessive weight can affect education, employment levels and income, the effect of attractiveness on appearance on employment and income, what's the stigma of overweight, and the potential steps to changing the bias. We'll also be discussing the legislation, how it affects the population, and how it can affect all that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to go over is how appearance can be best described as the overall umbrella term that refers to one's outward form. So one of these things that can be is your hair, your smile, how you present yourself, your clothes. That can also be that. The way your face is shaped, the way your body is shaped. So one of the common things that's important is weight, height, race, sex, beauty are really important to one's organizational experience. That can be described as people get judged and all that. So for example, excessive weight has an effect on employee outcomes on different groups and other people. For example, it's a lot different. Some people just don't. Some people just can't control it. For example, obesity can be running in the family. It can involve in your genetics, all that. A lot of people are overweight nowadays. Over 2/3 of the U.S. population is overweight or obese. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Over 2/3, that's more than half of the population in the U.S. is overweight or obese. Alrighty, guys, I got a question for you. How many people in the world are considered overweight in the world today? Remember, I said 2/3 of the population is considered obese in the US, but the rest of the world, there's more than 68 countries, I believe. Which one do you think would be best? Would it be A, 66 of the world's population, B, 1 billion people, C, 2 billion people, or D, 43 of the world's population? So go on, take a look, see what you think it is. Take a wild guess. Alrighty, now let's see. So the amount of people that are considered overweight in the world today, it wasn't A, 66 of the world's population. It was B, 1 billion people. I mean, I thought it could be 2 billion people, but turns out it's not. And then D, 43% of the world's population. That can't be right because even the US is 2/3 overweight or obese. Alrighty, today we're going to talk about, on this part of the project, is how weight can affect the education of people, employment levels, and how it can affect the general income of individuals. So, believe it or not, weight affects all of these. What sucks is that we live in sometimes kind of self-centered, manipulative kind of way, especially in the corporate world. So, for example, people of different weights can have a different type of education and different types of employment level. That just goes on to background. For example, some people are naturally overweight and some people are naturally skinny. There's just something, metabolisms are different, lifestyles are different, more people eat differently than others. So believe it or not, what's clear from studies is that fewer fat people have higher levels of education and employment levels. And there's more fat people with lower levels of income and employment level and education. And people with higher excessive weight are employed longer than people who have no excessive weight. So it turns out from those studies that like I said, it just depends on the background and such. So now we're going to talk about how Appearance and how attractiveness affects the employment status of someone and the income status of someone. So numerous researchers have investigated the effect of attractiveness on perception of the applicants of competence, qualifications, hiring decisions, job placement, job type, initial salary, and how the salary grows, and the promotion and advancement of both men and women. So attractive people are advantaged over those who are not as attractive in the United States or any other nation. Attractive people are considered better in employment and income than less or unattractive people, which doesn't seem right, but apparently that's what the studies say. It appears that for lower level and female dominated positions, attractiveness improves women employment opportunities and their income. However, for promotional opportunities or in a male dominant field in management positions, being too attractive or appearing too feminine can backfire and reduce precipitations of competence and qualifications, and reducing the likelihood of being chosen for that job. Another thing that can affect attractiveness is height, believe it or not. Height is related to employment outcomes and has different effects for men and women. For example, height has been to be a positive effect on men for the likelihood of them being hired, but it doesn't really do anything for performance. Now, for women, it doesn't affect them per se, but now for US participants, both men and women who are taller than the average have reported of having a higher earning, but men have received greater returns on height difference than a woman has. So what we're going to go over is what is the common diversity issue that tends to get overlooked when applying for a job. So we got A, weight, B, appearance, C, both weight and appearance, or D, gender. Which one do you think it is? I'll give you a moment. Alrighty, so the correct answer for what is the common diversity issue that tends to get overlooked when applying for a job is C, both A and B. For example, we talked about how weight can affect the unemployment, and more people who are overweight tend to have a hard time finding a job and tend to be more unemployed longer than people with less excessive weight. Appearance, most people have a positive appearance on positive experience with appearance. D, gender doesn't really matter per se. It's more about the weight and appearance. So C is the correct answer. Alrighty, now we're going to go over the bias and the discrimination for excessive weight. For example, like I said, unemployment rises in overweight people. Unequal employment opportunities are for the overweight. The acceptance needs to be of being publicly humiliated. There's also inferior health care when compared to those of normal weight, and difficulty getting social acceptance. For example, look at this picture right here. See how the one red person, the overweight person, is different from all the other one and is pointed out before everyone? And the quote from James Wilson, order exists because the system of beliefs and sentiments held by members of a society sets limits for what those members can do. And in the picture, it says, as a clinician and former individual affected by obesity, I have the advantage or disadvantage to have been seen or experienced weight bias from both sides of the fence. Because of these things, I want to discuss the healthcare provider perspective to try to understand why even givers, whose first concern is to do no harm, so commonly harbor this bias and what can we do. So the root of weight bias can run deep. From the time we are children, we learn fat is bad and thin is good. There are numerous sustaining this with children as young as 3 years old. So there should be no reason why weight bias is also exhibited by those affected by obesity. Consider the following effects of obesity prejudice, all of which are supported in the medical, mental health, and social welfare. Unequal employment opportunity, again, acceptance of being humiliated, inferior health care with those, difficulty in accessing individual insurance coverage, inhibition in seeking medical care, and difficulty gaining social acceptance. Unlike the children in the schoolyard, most adults may not deliberately set out to inflict pain despite bearing witness to people acting on the negative feelings. So all that can be a bias of being overweight and how hard it is for them. In order to solve the problem is you need to acknowledge it. You can't solve the problem if you don't admit that it exists in the first place. So to deal with it again, it must be acknowledged. The more people that are aware of the problem, the easier it is to solve. And this, by Y.W. Boston, weight-based discrimination in the workplace is real. Here's why talking about it matters. Let's be honest. How many times have you been at your workplace and we make a comment about someone's appearance, whether it's weight, their shoes, their clothes, their appearance? Weight is one of the overlying factors. We've all dealt with people who are a little overweight, sweating and everything, and there's a bias towards them, whether they think people think they're lazier than other people, whether they don't work hard, whether they just eat too much. That's just a factor. Now imagine the overweight coworkers when you hear those jokes about talking about customers or clients and all that. We must acknowledge the problem in order for us to fix it and welcome people to break that bias. Now we have this infographic here from Renew Bariatrics. How common is weight discrimination? 59%. The researchers have found that 59% of obese adults reported weight discrimination. 42 reported experience unfair treatment because of their size. See how crazy that is? 59% of obese adults reported weight discrimination. That could be at the workplace, because most of the time we spend 8 hours at work. 42% of that experience it just because of their size. It doesn't even have to be their appearance. It just has to be about their size. All right, now here's some examples of what is weight discrimination. For example, the first one says denied employment opportunities because of your weight. Can you imagine that? Being denied your ability to work. You're out there trying to beat the statistic and you're denied because of the fact that you're overweight. Belittle or mocking overweight people. That's not right. And that is just unfair, and that can affect not only that person's self-image, but it can affect others who are experiencing or viewing that belittle or mocking. You can be harassed at work. That's a sign of weight discrimination. Let's be honest, when we were younger, we used to poke at their pudge. That's not right. Now, receiving poor customer service because of weight. Can you imagine that, going to a place of business and you're asking for help and you're not getting the right treatment, all because of the fact that you're overweight? The next one could be social exclusion from friends or family members because of weight. Can you imagine that your friends or family, your loved ones, isolating you because of the fact that you're overweight? Now, the next one could be poor treatment from doctors and other medical providers due to weight. Imagine you're sick, you have a cold or the flu, and that is affecting you, all because of the fact that you're overweight. All of these are signs of weight discrimination, and that shouldn't be right. Losing weight is hard enough as it is, and especially if someone's trying, that can just ruin their progress, and it could just affect their mental health. Now we're going to discuss how we can combat weight bias. For example, don't be afraid to show empathy to your fellow employees. Remember, all it takes is for one person to lead to achieve a change, a very lasting change. We must lead by example, be the first person to call out discrimination. So when you, like for example, when we were in elementary school, talk to an adult, talk to someone above it, talk to management, talk to another person's loved one. If there's a bully, handle it. Another way, you wouldn't want to be treated like that, so why should you treat someone like that? Treat how you want to be treated. And on the infographic, it says right here, the experiences of weight bias can occur in everywhere. For example, at your job, at the doctor's office, at school, on social media, the news, TV, even from friends and family. All right, let's talk about the legislation relevant to weight and appearance. The vast majority of courts have held that obesity is not a disability under the Americans with Disability Act unless it is caused by an underlying health condition. Here's a quote. Presently in the United States, no federal legislation prohibits discrimination based on weight alone. This means you can be fired because of your weight and you have no protection. Now, Americans with the Disability Acts can protect those who have a disability or perceive to have one. So at any rate, you can get fired for just being overweight at your job. How ridiculous does that sound? Losing weight is hard enough as it is. And you can imagine you having no income due to the fact that you're being overweight. How is that fair for certain individuals who have a hard time trying to control their weight? Okay, we're going to talk about the body size anti-discrimination law. Only 1 out of 50 states has passed a law that protects the body size discriminations from happening. For example, height, weight, and appearance. The only state that has passed that law is Michigan, which passed the law in 1976. Several other cities have passed their own laws concerning the weight and appearance discrimination. Some of those examples are Madison, Wisconsin, Washington, D.C., and San Francisco. Now, some cities are having pending approval for anti-discrimination, which can be New York, Vermont, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. All of these people are trying to combat discrimination. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the world population. Over 1 billion people are obese. 1 out of 8 people are obese, which classifies as 880 million adults and 159 million children are obese. Now, obesity levels have nearly doubled for adults and quadrupled for children since 1990. So imagine that. Before you're even 18 or 5 years old, you're already considered obese. That doesn't do well for when you're older because it's even harder to get healthier when you're older. Now, by 2030, an estimated 20%, if not over 1.5 billion people, will be obese in today's world. Let me repeat that. For future, in 6 years, by 2030, 20% or over 1.5 billion people will be considered obese. Now, let's look at the American population. 1 out of 3 adults are obese. 1 out of 6 children are obese. The American population ranks in top 15 most obese countries by population. Another one ranks in top 10 most obese by population. Obesity overweight percentage have nearly doubled from the 90s. This can be broken down even further by race, age, sex, education, and etc. Typical rates are higher in blacks, Hispanics, and other ethnicities compared to whites. Over 300,000 people die every year from obesity in America. Now let's talk about the other countries and how the population is affected by obesity. So obesity affects developed and developing countries. The most obese countries by percentage is the Cook Islands, Palau, Nauru, and Samoa. Now, some of the least obese countries by percentage is Timor-Leste, North Korea, Burundi, and Myanmar. Now we discussed how bad population has been affected by obesity. Let's affect of excessive weight on the health and the cost to the employer. Obesity is a major health challenge with some implications for employers. This can affect the employee by sleep apnea, stroke, depression, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, infertility, asthma. All of this can be affected because most of the employees will have to take off due to having these underlying issues, missing work. This can affect their job performance. All of this due to excessive weight. Now, the overall workplace costs include $31.1 billion in higher disability payments, $5.2 billion higher workers' compensation program costs, $82.3 billion in higher absenteeism is associated with obesity, $160.3 billion higher presenteeism associated with obesity, with $113 in billing for obesity, and for overweight is $46.5 billion. All of that is costing for being obese. Now we're going to discuss how much it costs per year for the average worker. So it's going to be $1,514 in higher medical costs for each worker, $664 in higher disability costs for the worker, $112 in higher injury workers' compensation, $1,755 in higher absenteeism costs, $2,427 in higher presenteeism costs. All that is affected year after year for each worker. Now imagine that for the workplace. Now for the impact of obesity on employment. It has been recorded that obese people tend to earn less than others. They are less likely to be hired or remain unemployed compared to people that are more trim or in better shape than others. Now, here on the infographic, there are some statistics. 73.6% of adult Americans are overweight or obese. Now, 42.5% of that is people 20 and plus. Adults at the age of 20 plus are also including overweight are 73.6. Now, some direct healthcare costs is 46% increase in inpatient costs, 27% increase in outpatient costs, 80% increase in RX costs for those of normal weight. That costs 480 billion people to the employers. Now, this affects productivity, believe it or not. Estimated impact beyond medical claims and healthcare utilization in U.S. costs are a result of work loss related to absenteeism or presenteeism, disability, and workers' comp. That costs $1.24 trillion. Now, it can be also the greatest contributor of chronic diseases. At least 60 comorbidities and 13 cancers are attributed to obesity, accounting for 40% of total cost nationwide, which is costing an estimate of $1.72 trillion. Now, let's ask, why does it cost employers so much? Employers pay higher life insurance premiums and pay out more for workers' compensation for employers who are obese than for employers who are not. People with large employer private insurance coverage who had an obesity or overweight diagnosis had an average of $12,588 in total annual health costs, which is more than double the $4,699 in health spending for those with no obesity or overweight diagnosis on their health insurance claim for that year.